Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, as college football fans, this is the time to start looking at what do the ceilings look like for a lot of these college football programs. And you look at Florida State, I think there's a couple different conversations. One, what does the ceiling look like for Florida State in terms of what their schedule looks like and what this team can accomplish in 2024? But I think just as importantly, taking a look at this Florida State depth chart and say, what does the best version of Florida State look like on the football field, and how do they reach their ceiling in terms of this unit coming together in 2024? Fired up to get into this conversation. Before we do, and as always, just want to say to the Florida State fans, would love to hear from you guys in the comment section in terms of what are the season expectations for Florida State? But I think more importantly, as Florida State fans, what do you think the ceiling is of this Florida State program heading into 2024? And if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And Dill, I'll kick this one to you. Florida State reaching their ceiling in 2024. What does it look like?
I think a really, really good season for Florida State in his ACC championship. And frankly, I think that's going to start being the standard. But also, as I look ahead, the reason I'm a little hesitant to call for a national title right now is, frankly, I don't think they've put that recruiting pipeline together quite yet. I think you see this sophomore class is kind of the first year where Mike Norvel was recruiting at like a championship level, and he's starting to do it. But I think right now I'm a little hesitant to put them in that like national championship or bust conversation. But I think they should be very competitive in the ACC, and I think they have a very good chance.
The ceiling is clearly an ACC championship, and quite frankly, a team that can be dangerous in the college football playoffs. Again, I'm sitting here mid-July. I don't think I'm going to take Florida State to win a national championship, but I can see this team winning the ACC and them being an extremely dangerous football program in the college football playoffs. I think you are right. This Florida State team, 2 to 3 years down the road, potentially just even in 2025, the standard for Florida State, the expectations are going to start to kind of get ramped up because we all see what Mike Norvel is doing in terms of building this roster. There's not many programs that are balancing using the transfer portal just about as effectively as anybody in the country, the hit rate being extremely high, but also getting it going on the high school trail. That is, I'm kind of with you. I think they need another year of dominant high school recruiting before I think we go into a season saying national championship ceiling. But I think we look at this Florida State program and say that's coming down the pipeline awfully quickly.
And I don't frankly want to say like they can't go win, and it really surprised me if they won a national championship. But getting into this team, I think that defense led by a secondary that I think will be one of the better units in the country. And you combine that with a defensive line that I think has a lot of potential. As much as people think it's going to take a step back, I think you have one side of the ball that should be really, really good, bordering on elite. And if you have that, you definitely give yourself a chance, especially with this expanded playoff.
You look at Florida State, and you're kind of getting to the conversation of what does the best version of Florida State look like on the football field. I think it does start with the secondary. I think we're looking at one of the best secondaries that we see, not only in the ACC, but in the country. And what makes me so optimistic about this Florida State defense is when you have A.Z. Thomas and Fentrell Cypress, two guys that are probably going to go in the top 100 of the NFL draft in 8 months, you can start getting so creative in terms of how you want to call your defense, loading boxes. When you feel comfortable putting your cornerbacks on islands, you can start walking that Bucky and Shaheem Brown up to the box. Start getting creative in terms of the looks and blitz packages that you're giving opposing offenses. Not a lot of teams have the privilege that Florida State has with elite cornerbacks. Get creative in terms of how you're bringing that pressure. And I think you make another really good point. This defensive line, it's a little bit less proven than we had last year, where you knew you had a hammer in Jared Verse. You knew you had a rising star in Patrick Payton. Braden Fisk emerged as just a dominant interior defensive lineman along with Fabian Lovett. There's more question marks about the Florida State defensive line, but again, getting into what the best version of Florida State is, it's guys like Marvin Jones Jr. emerging as an elite pass rusher in the ACC. It's guys like Darrell Jackson and Joshua Farmer kind of maintaining that level of dominance more consistently. We've seen both Joshua Farmer and Darrell Jackson Jr. play really good football, just not as consistent as we'd like. I think the best version is those guys emerging as some game wreckers for Florida State in 2024.
And I think to me, it's 100% about that interior. I think they have so many guys at that edge spot. I think somebody's going to kind of step up, be the guy, whether that's Patrick Payton, whether it's obviously Marvin Jones Jr., Byron Turner, I think, is a very underrated football player. And frankly, you probably say the same about Duarte. So I love this edge room. I think it's really good. I think to me, again, if they're going to get to that like championship level defense, I think one of these interior guys is going to have to surprise on the upside and be able to play at a very dominant level. Because that's the one thing is I watch these Florida State games back. Braden Fisk was so good for them, and he was so disruptive and such a big part of why that defense was so formidable. So again, I think you kind of look one of those interior guys. I love Daniel Lyons. I think you leaving him out is a crime. He's that guy. I thought there were moments where he was getting in the backfield, being a playmaker, maybe at a higher level than frankly you saw from Farmer Jackson Jr. But at the end of the day, if they get one of those guys rolling, you have a secondary that doesn't really make a ton of mistakes, is going to force teams to hold the ball. I think you can make a lot of plays and be a truly dominant.
I think one of the conversations, the depth on the inside. Okay, we feel good about Joshua Farmer and Daryl Jackson Jr. What do elite college football defensive lines look like on the defensive line? It's having 4, 5, 6 guys on the inside that you trust, that you can rotate throughout 4 quarters. You talk about winning late in seasons, winning in November, making a college football playoff run. You got to have depth on the defensive line, right? Michigan, Georgia, all teams that had that depth on the defensive line. And I think at the linebacker room, we're not going to get up here and say this linebacker room is going to be one of the best units in the country. I think what you're looking for is just some stability, right? We just can't have liabilities at the linebacker.
He has to be great. I think that's what it comes down to. I think he needs to play. I mean, you saw the good moments in him. I was doing a little film dive on him. We'll be getting that out soon. I think there's a lot of good you saw, but there's a lot of work to replace. And frankly, you're very unsure about who's going to be his running mate. So he needs to have a really, really good year, be athletic, be in control of that defense, kind of like Tatum Bethune was. I think a lot of it hinges on him because you kind of look. I think you feel pretty good about most of this defense. Aside from
and I think bringing in not only getting DJ Lundy back from Colorado, but bringing in a guy like Cam Riley that's played a lot of football in the SEC, like it just makes you feel better about what the floor is for this linebacker room in 2024. Now, Dill, transitioning to the offensive side of the football, and you ask me, what does the best version of Florida State on offense look like? A lot of people are going to talk about DJU. We're going to talk about DJU in just a second. Where I want to start is on the offensive line, where you've seen consistent, steady improvement on the offensive line. This is a unit that's gotten better every single year for the last 3 years. That being said, you go back to how we talked about this team in 2023, it probably wasn't a national championship caliber offensive line. That was probably the one part of this unit that wasn't national championship caliber in 2023. I think for Florida State fans, what you're excited about is you bring in a high upside transfer in TJ Ferguson. You're bringing a very high floor player in Richie Leonard IV. We know he can play really good football, but what excites me the most is this offensive line just being a little bit more healthy. It was so clear that they were banged up last year, but I think just as importantly, a little bit more continuity with this Florida State offensive line where, yes, you bring in 2 transfers, 2 that may be starting offensive linemen in 2024, but a lot of these other guys played a lot of football together, guys like Maurice Smith, guys like Darius Washington. It's a veteran group, and if it's a group that can just stay healthy and have the same 5 guys playing on the offensive line for multiple weeks, which just did not happen in 2023, there is reason to believe this offensive line takes another step in 2024. I'm not taking them to be the best offensive line in the country, but an improvement on the offensive line, another jump. Again, best version of Florida State, I think it starts on the offensive line.
And if they can keep themselves out of that 2nd and long and 3rd and long more consistently, and that felt like a huge problem, is their inability to kind of set their running game floor up a little bit. Too many negative plays, too many 0-yard plays around the line of scrimmage. If they can be more consistent, and I love Roydell Williams' ability to be physical in the run game, love DJU's ability to be physical in the run game. If they can set that up and be more in that 2nd and 5, live kind of in that world, I think that gives Mike Norvel and that offensive staff many more opportunities to dial things up. And that's when you kind of look at guys like Jalen Lucas, like Malik Benson, like a Hakeem Williams or Darian Williamson, who, again, guys with a lot of firepower, a lot of explosive potential. If they can kind of continue to make those big plays, I think that's like a huge, huge step in them kind of maintaining some of that continuity and some of that like firepower they had on offense, because that's how they were scoring last year. I mean, they were hitting a lot of big plays. I thought their consistency in terms of how they were not able to stay on schedule a ton held them back a little bit. So again, some of those things you look, their ability to be more physical, offensive line, playing at a higher level simply because of continuity, along with adding a couple of really nice transfer portal guys. I think that goes a long way. And again, like you certainly lose some talent. Not going to get up there and say the wide receiver room is quite as good, but I think you can probably cobble it together and keep that firepower.
See, I will get to the wide receiver. I want to say one more thing on. I think you make a phenomenal point with kind of Florida State staying on schedule. Hey, Trey Benson was, I think, my favorite running back last year in terms of if you asked me to build my offense. Trey Benson's high on the list. The Florida State rushing attack last year seemed very boom or bust, right? There were, like you kind of said, a lot of 2nd and 9s, a lot of 2nd and 10s with runs for no gain. If you can stay on schedule a little bit more, that's going to help this offense. The pass catching unit, and I'm going to extrapolate it a little bit more to just the talent on the offensive side of the football. That's probably one of the bigger question marks. And again, getting back to answering our thesis statement for this episode, what is the best version of this Florida State team? It's so many different ways to attack you on offense. And I think you kind of highlighted Lawrence Tuafili, Jalen Lucas. These are two X factors that they don't need to get 15 touches a game each. But if you can figure out just a couple of different ways, whether it's 5 or 6 touches each for these players out in space, let them hit some explosive plays for you, that's probably number one. But I think secondly is just these pass catchers kind of stepping up a little bit. It's a large unknown. There's not a ton of production in this room or proven production. That being said, it's about as talented of a wide receiver room as we see, right? Malik Benson, that's a guy that could be a top 100 NFL draft pick. You look at Hakeem Williams going into his second year. I know a lot of Florida State fans like Ja'Kai Douglas as well, who's played some solid football for Florida State.
He's another part of their like staying on schedule conversation to me is, can they work a little bit more through the middle? I didn't think they had that guy in the slot. They didn't have that tight end who was really prolific in the middle of the field either. So again, you add another wrinkle into that offense when you, again, you're kind of right. It just felt boom or bust, whether that was pass game, whether that was in the run game. A lot of it was so predicated on explosiveness. I think you just have a little bit more diverse range of skills. Again, a very physical runner in Roydell, very physical in DJU, a very good slot guy in Ja'Kai who makes plays with the ball in his hands. I think there's a lot of things I'm looking like, is it arguably a slightly more complete offense? As much as you don't have maybe the same top-end talent, but is it you have more ways to hurt teams than you did last year?
100%. And I think one guy before we close it out that I'll shout out, and you mentioned the tight end position, Jaheim Bell was a good tight end, but he was an unorthodox tight end. And I thought Mike Norvel and that coaching staff did a phenomenal job kind of incorporating him in as just an offensive weapon, whether it was an H-back, leaking him out into the flat. You have a true freshman in Landon Thomas that is that prototypical tight end that can work the middle of the field. And so I wonder if you do see a little bit more consistency attack in the middle of the field because you have that kind of true tight end that you probably just didn't really have in the 2023 year. I think that's another phenomenal point, Dill. I think to round this episode out, this is a Florida State team that, again, there's more questions than answers as opposed to 12 months ago. But there's a lot of answers on this roster, or potential answers.
And not to cut you off, but I think one I don't think we can go without saying it is DJU. I mean, DJU's ceiling is ungodly high. I think you look at what Mike Norvell's done with quarterbacks, especially looking at how he developed Jordan Travis from that first time we saw him take the snap or take the ball over under the Jimbo years where he was really cobbling it together, really unorthodox, and then by the end, very polished quarterback. I think DJU's on his way. I thought he had an awesome year at Oregon State. You started to see him be a little bit more accurate, be a little bit more steady. I think if Mike Norvel can get the most out of him, his ceiling is fascinatingly high. And that's, again, when you talk about ceilings, and that's what this time of the year is for. You hype yourself up. You think like, all right, I'm a Michigan fan. Michigan's going to win it because Alex Orji's going to be Cam Newton. That's my mindset. If DJU plays really, really well, his talent is up there with anyone. His ability to run the ball, ability to hit every throw on the field. If Mike Norvel gets a lot out of him, I mean, our ceiling of ACC title kind of range goes out the window, and this is a national championship team.
Very, very good catch there. I can't believe we're going to talk about the ceiling of Florida State and not mention DJU's ceiling. Great catch. We'll close it there. Florida State fans, again, I'm most intrigued to hear from the Florida State fans. Like, what does the ceiling look like to the Nole fans? Hit us in the comments section. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.